This is a huge tree. I've never seen a tree like this.
No, no, there aren't too many trees around that look like this. This is, you know, I don't know, 200-300 years, more than that, years old. And you could see the roots, how they shoot. And it makes the tree very, very stable. I mean, this tree is going to be here for God knows how many years. And of course, this is not a baobab tree, it's a silk cotton tree. But this reminds me of the proverb of the baobab tree, you know, that wisdom or truth is like a baobab tree. No single person, no one person has arms long enough to embrace it. And who can embrace this tree? That's what knowledge is like. That's what wisdom is like. That's what truth is like. In other words, there's no single culture that has all knowledge, all truth in its embrace. So if we are to surround the baobab tree of truth or knowledge, we virtually have to, you know, to hold hands before we can surround it. And that's what we should do. Realize in the world that we need each other to come to greater knowledge. And then inside these holes, you know, these openings, the animals, when they have children, you know, they live here and nurse them. Big tree.
You were telling me about a man, the British were building a road and there was a huge tree.
Yeah, yeah, that was a baobab tree actually, near the Tema Harbor. You know, when they were constructing the harbor, there was this tree that was in the way, and they did everything they couldn't uproot it. And there was this tree which would not move. So the foreman suggested to the contractors that they should contact the priest in the area. And so they contacted him, and he asked for one sheep and some bottles of schnapp. And he came to the tree, and he slaughtered the sheep and poured libation, and told them that the spirit in the tree has decided to move. So they could then go ahead and uproot the tree. It was as big as this. And so they started ordering the bulldozers to get near the tree, but the priest told them not to worry. They should just tie a rope around the tree and pull it. And they tied a rope around it, pulled it, and it came down root and branch. They couldn't believe it.
You mean they had modern equipment in the beginning?
Yes. And they couldn't move the tree.
Bulldozers?
Bulldozers, nothing could move it. Yeah. That's why they took the advice of the foreman. So well, let's try, you know, they were ready to try anything.
Now you're saying something extremely profound. You're saying that the African priest came.
Yeah.
Poured libation.
Slaughtered the sheep.
Talked
to the spirit in the tree. And it agreed to move so they could do what they were out there to do. And the people started ordering the bulldozers. He said, don't worry, tie a rope around it. They tied a rope around it and pulled it. That's all they needed.
With their hands?
With their hands. And it came down root and branch. You see, we have access to some knowledge in Africa that you would describe as hidden. Only a few people have access to this knowledge. But it's only because, you see, this knowledge dates from millions. I mean, we've lived in these forests for millions of years. And so we must know our way about. We must understand the environment in which we live. And people, herbalists, can go and talk to trees, talk to leaves and so on. Exchange, communicate with them before they bring them home. We can't communicate with nature. So in recent years when I read in America, you know, people would talk to plants and so on, and the plants would respond. You know, I said, well, you think this is new? We've known this for millions of years.
You're saying something that's too fantastic to believe. How is one to understand that in Africa there are powers, understanding where you could communicate with trees and with nature, and it actually responds to you, like the spirit leaving the tree, and yet the European was able to conquer Africa. I don't quite, why didn't we use those powers on him?
Well, the point is that, you see, the power, as the years wore on, came to be in the hands of a few people. But the point is that the power is still here. You see, of all the people in the world, Africans are the only ones who could not be exterminated by the Europeans.
How do you mean that?
Yeah,
We are
they were able,
dominated by
yeah, but we have not been exterminated. And the European domination is only so much. Every European who is in his right senses will recognize, although he may not admit it, his own limitations when he comes to Africa, because he realizes that there's a large area over which he has no control, of which he has very little or no knowledge. So all he does is to consign it to the realm of superstition. But it's not superstition. If you know it, you know that it's knowledge. You see, our ancestors devised various tools for addressing the various problems that we have. All reality is not limited to our sense experience. What the European has dominated is the material, sense experiential aspects of human life, or of all of reality. But reality goes beyond our sense experiences. Our sense experiences constitute only one aspect of reality, not all of reality. That's why they say if the only tool you have is a hammer, you treat everything like a nail. But for some things you need an axe or a hoe or a cutlass, and a hammer is not useful, you see. So there's still a large realm of African life that has not been conquered by Europeans.
And
They will never conquer that. They will never have that understanding. And of course, you see, the European, being a recent arrival, claims that they know everything. Well, they don't know everything. I spoke in America years ago, and I was telling the people something, and one woman said, well, I didn't know that. And I said, well, what makes you think you know everything? That's what the European thinks. We know everything. No, they don't know everything. In fact, some of the things they are calling new discoveries are things that are actually not new. They've been here all along. When you tell us that matter and energy are interchangeable, well, we've known this for millions of years. A few years ago, 2 centuries ago, you said this was a pagan idea. But now you're telling me that there's energy in this and that this is actually moving. Well, we've known this for millions of years, and that's why we've reacted to our environment in the way we have. Because we live in harmony. We live in a state of equilibrium, you know, with our environment, with nature. And this is the way it should be. And this is the way it has been for years as we stand here. You see, we are communicating with nature. Now, communication doesn't have to be audible. No. You know, communication goes on even though you're not saying anything. We're not even touching the leaves. But we are absorbing something into our system by merely standing here. And of course, you know, the Europeans say, oh, there's nothing here, you're standing here alone. And they say, oh, it's superstition. You know, I went to a conference with a European philosopher, and he says, oh, there's nothing like ghosts. If there are ghosts, we should be able to photograph them. I said, well, you see, you only photograph a palpable object. You can't photograph a ghost. You need a different equipment, and you don't have it. And so you use the same equipment for everything. So if you don't capture it, oh, it doesn't exist. But you don't think that your equipment is limited. See, we have a different equipment for detecting ghosts.
I would want to continue the conversation. In other words, the African is really not worried about European. The Europeans have nuclear weapons. They have great armies, great air force. You don't see him conquering Africa.
No, he may be able to, by way of speaking, conquer Africa, maybe materially or otherwise. But the material aspect of life is not the only aspect. There are so many areas that the European can never conquer because it's Africa. You know, and I'm not suggesting that the material is stronger than the spiritual or anything, but there is something here. Look, the European has been here for 500 years, let's say. And one would expect that when one came to Africa, one would not find anything that is African. But you come here and you still see so many things. I tell my students, Africa has changed. And I quickly follow it up with a statement, Africa has not changed.
How do you mean that?
Yeah, Africa has changed, Africa has not changed. That is the reality of Africa, which is to say, some aspects of Africa have changed, but some aspects of Africa have not changed. Because what is true never changes. It's the same. It may be expressed in another form. But, you know, the European will only looks for material things to fill his belly, very materialistic. But that's not all of life. You don't need, you know, there are other things that you need that are equally important. So the culture, the value systems, and so on, and some of these hidden, you say hidden because not too many people know it. People able to talk to plant, understand the, you know, and change into certain animals and use certain powers to do certain things, you know. I mean, all these things beat the imagination of the European. But it's only because the European has limited knowledge. You see, there's so many ways in which the European is just a child. I describe Western culture as a teenage culture because it just appeared on the face of the earth. So they must have the best, the biggest, you know, the most of everything. But all the mature civilizations are sedate, quiet, not loud, African, Native American. We've been here too long to not to learn anything, you see. And what I'm saying can be seen in the life of every individual, from childhood to maturity. How many loudmouth old people have you seen? And how many loudmouth teenagers don't you have in your neighborhood? They don't know anything. That's what European culture is like. It's a very recent culture. It has taken aspects from everything. I mean, what claim does Europe have on Egypt? Well, they've taken from Egyptian culture and they tell Africans, you don't have any claim on Egypt. That's nonsense. Who created Egyptian civilization? It was Africans, not Europeans. There was no European anywhere then to create anything. So a recent arrival comes and says, oh, you don't have anything. I tell you, you know, I tell you where you came from. Well, here we have a lot of stories about beginnings, you know, and some people say, well, our ancestors came from the ground. To welcome you to my farm, which is in the hills of Akwapim. And from these hills, you have the nice view of the ocean and the plains. And I want to assure you that this is Africa. And this is our holy land. And this is indeed a paradise, if only we would know it. Our ancestors have lived here for millions and millions and millions of years. And they have interacted with the environment, and they have learned a lot of wisdom by living in these forests. And some of that wisdom God has blessed us to discover. There's still a lot more to be discovered, and we hope that in the not too distant future we'll be in possession of this so that the world will know what we have. You see, we are a very, very blessed people. Now, this farm of mine, I acquired in 1969. The whole farm is 15 acres. And when I walk you through, you'll begin to appreciate the beauty of nature in Africa. There's such peace and quietness here, which you don't get in other parts of the world. And certainly this is the way God intended us to live.
Come back to the camera.
The idea for this farm is to make it into a paradise, you know, as I was saying. Those who are not sure they'll go to paradise can just come here and have a taste, a foretaste of what they will miss. But at least they will have satisfied themselves that they have indeed stepped in paradise and enjoyed some of the beauty of life in paradise. I have a fruit here, which we call Asara. I'll show you the tree. Unfortunately, it's not in season now. It's flowering. But it's a little brown berry, and you only have to eat one, and everything you eat tastes sweet after that. It's an incredible plant. And I also have some medicinal plants here, which I will show you. A lot of medicines. I have cinnamon right here. I'll let you see the cinnamon tree. Cashew, I have cashew, avocados. You know, I showed you the papaya and the palm fruit and just a whole host of it. I mean, see, most of these things I didn't plant. Nature planted them. I found them here. And when we walk through the forest, you see that nature has been... I mean, there are no people who are more blessed than we are. We're very blessed in Africa. And my worry is, how do we get people to see how blessed they are, instead of believing that they are cursed or hungry or something? You know, we're not poor. If we are poor, it is only because we've conditioned our minds to believe that we are poor. But I walk about feeling very wealthy, very rich, very blessed, because I know that what I have, no other people, no continent has this abundance. I give you these 15 acres. What you have here, you may not find in the whole of Australia. And yet it's just on this small 15-acre patch. But of course, for me, this is my world, and the world begins and ends here, in terms of the variety of things that you find here. Oh yes, the soil is very rich. Now, let me show you, to just give you an example. I planted this cassia tree, you know, last year. Just a year ago, I planted this tree. And now, as everybody says, oh, African soils are poor. Well, if the soils are poor, why is everything green? Tell me. If the soils are not rich, then everything should be brown, parched, drying. But this tree I planted last year, and look at how tall it's become. I can't believe it myself. And those cassias there too, I planted them last year, and one of them is more than 18 feet tall. And this one is more than 20 feet tall. Just look, you know, it's incredible. And that one. So the soils are very rich. Of course, there are some areas where the soils aren't as good. You know, you go to the Sahara and so on. But down here in the tropical forest, you know, all you need is water, because you have 12 months of plant growth. And anything will grow anywhere. As you could see, after just a couple of rainfalls, you know, everything just springs to life. And even though we have dry seasons, it's still, you know, almost evergreen throughout the year. The books, oh, the soils are not good and there's leaching and so on. But look at this. Now, almost every plant we have here, the avocado, we have 2 harvests a year. The mango comes twice a year. Everything, most of the things we have here come twice a year. And this avocado, you don't water it, you don't put fertilizer on it, it takes care of itself. And twice a year, it will produce fruit. Now, what else can nature and God do for us? Twice a year, we have harvest. You don't have to do anything. The trees take care of themselves because the soils are good. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this harvest. If these trees were in the temperate climates, you have to put fertilizer on them and water and so on. But here we don't put anything. They just grow. And I come as a farmer and I harvest my avocados and mangoes and guavas and so on, and oranges. Twice a year we have oranges. And if the soils weren't good, we wouldn't have this harvest. So, you know, it's just a lie. Of course, we've come to believe it too, that, oh, our soils are not good. Well, we don't put any fertilizer here, and yet we get our food. The environment has taught us a lot of wisdom. And our ancestors looked on the environment not just as a source of sustenance, you know, from which they got their food and building materials and so on, but they also saw the environment, nature, the natural environment, as a source of wisdom. Nature taught them a lot, because to this day, in spite of all the achievements human beings have made, nature is still our greatest teacher. And so from these birds and trees and stones and rivers and so on, we got a lot of wisdom. And sometimes the wisdom is put into the mouth of birds. For instance, we have the hawk. And one proverb says the hawk, all that God created is good, as it flies aloft. You see, because it's a hawk that flies so high and looks below, and beholds the beauty of nature and says, all that God created is good, says the hawk. And of course, even looking at lions and hunters, you see, our ancestors said, until the lions have their own historians, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. You know, the hunters always take the credit, but if the lions would speak, and if people would hear what the lions have to say, they will know that all the credit shouldn't go to the hunter. And from this we learn a big lesson. Until we African descendants can speak for ourselves, have our own historians, of course others will write our history at our expense to glorify themselves. And it's a very insightful piece of wisdom that comes from merely observing nature. Of course, this is the farm, and one of the experiences we get when we go to the farm is to have a thorn pricking your foot. And so our ancestors said, when a thorn gets into the toe, you know, the whole body bends to pull it out, which is precisely what we do. And what's the lesson from that? Well, when something happens to somebody, something happens to one of us, all of us go to the help or to the assistance of that person who is suffering. You would say, ask, what has the foot got to do with the arm or the trunk? But the proverb says, when a thorn gets into the toe, the whole body bends to pull it out. And so, just looking around us, birds, nature, we learn a lot of lessons which we can apply to our lives. Now, all this wisdom, tremendous wisdom, has come from our ancestors. And I have said over and over again that there's nothing anybody anywhere has said or thought which my ancestors, our ancestors, have not thought about. If we don't know, it is because our knowledge is limited, and it's not because our people never thought or said anything. And as I study the wisdom of our forebears, and I travel through the villages and I talk to people, I am overwhelmed. I stand in awe of my forebears who came up with all this wisdom that is needed so badly by the world. And of course, when we people of African descent, you see, get to know this wisdom, it will make us feel good, it will empower us, because then we know that we too have contributed something. Only we don't know what we contributed. I mean, anything you can think about. From these forests around us, we got a lot of medicines. I'll show you some of these medicines and what they are used for. Right here we have that big tree called Fintian. George, you have some Fintian and Precursor there, maybe? Yeah. Yeah, well, we can find some. And all these are medicinal plants that our forebears used. And then you ask yourself, well, who taught them that these trees and plants have medicinal properties? Well, it means there were people who searched and searched and searched and discovered so many things that will surprise us. But there were people who were very determined, people who kept on exploring, and through the explorations they discovered so many things. Now, those of us living today are not aware of the numerous things they discovered, and so we are easily awed by the discoveries of others. Well, if humanity began here and this is the home of mankind or humankind, then of course all that human beings know today originate from here. I mean, everything else is just an embellishment, you know. But the simple metal implements that our ancestors invented has been, of course, through industrialization and sophistication, you know, become something else. But it's still the same simple instruments which we use to overcome our environment. And so the whole world practically owes us a living, and the credit that is due us hasn't been given to us. But we don't have to wait for others to give us the credit. We must claim the credit ourselves by studying our culture, going deep into the past. Because after all, who wants, you know, these Europeans want to find out or discover only the things that go to inflate their egos. And we can't settle for the Europeans to tell us everything. it is our responsibility to search. It's there. It's there to be discovered by us, because we are the ones who need the information. They don't. When they see what is good about our past in the history, they cover it up, or they pass by, you know. But we are the ones to whom this heritage belongs, and so I have suggested that Africans in the diaspora and Africans on the continent should begin to cooperate in this common search for our origins, the contributions, the achievements of the past. I've always likened this to the sun shining behind you. And when the sun is behind you, your body casts a shadow in front of you, you see. And I think that if we delve into our past, which becomes like the sun behind us, we will cast a shadow way into the future. And I'm glad that there's this awakening coming towards the end of the 20th century. And if we really make use of this awakening, you see, we are casting a shadow into the 21st century, and it's ahead of us. So we mustn't look on the past as something shameful, or, you know, that we want to dissociate ourselves with, because I believe that our strength comes from our past. That's where our strength is coming from. And if we ignore our past, it will be like a pilot trying to fly without a compass. What's going to guide us? You see? So we need to embrace our past, which will give us the strength to move into the future. And I mean to say this, that the Africans in the diaspora need to know that they are not alone, that they didn't begin with slavery. Otherwise, you are cutting a large chunk of it. What is 500 years in history? We've been here for millions of years, and it's true, we've lived here for millions, more than we can count. You see, when Leakey discovered his skulls and skeletons in the Olduvai Gorge and dated them 3 million years, I said, well, fine, if 3 million is all they can count, you just give it to them. But our ancestors knew they've been here for longer than 3 million years, more than we can count. And we have to get this perspective. And of course, it's not that we slept through history. We were creating and inventing all the time. All the time. There was never a dull moment. I tell you about these elephant hunters who were hunting with bows and arrows. Can you imagine? Now the elephant is a ferocious creature, huge creature, which can trample any hunter to death. Now, they were only using bows and arrows. And with bows and arrows, you had to get very close to this creature who has a very strong sense of smell. So how did they do it? Because there are only two parts of the elephant's body that you can hurt, through the eyes and through the ears. Those are the only two soft spots on the elephant's body. If you shoot the arrow into the belly, you're just wasting your arrows. It won't penetrate. So our forebears came up with two plants, and they mixed them up and pounded them and smeared the whole body, including the nostrils and the ears. Then the elephants couldn't smell them. All they have to do was to prevent the elephant from seeing them, and so they could hide behind the grasses and behind the trees and get very close and then shoot through the eye. Now, if I, standing 2 feet away, kill an elephant, and you with a stand gun stand 50 feet, which of the two is the braver, and which of the two is the hunter? I with a bow and arrow, I'm the hunter. Not the one who stands 500 feet and just pulls a trigger and says, I'm a hunter. No, the bold man is the one who was 2 feet away. Let the man fold his gun and get 2 feet to the creature. See whether he can even fire his gun. The elephant will trample on the gun and break it into pieces. So, see, our people are very courageous.
You were talking about medicine, too.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of medicines. And some of the medicines, actually, our people learned by observing animals treat each other. We have a very powerful snake bite. And the story behind that snake bite, anti-snake bite medicine, is that a hunter, and I know the descendants of this hunter, they live on the Kwao Hills, going to Kumasi, you know, when you get in Koko and you see those rocky mountains up there. And this hunter was in the forest hunting. and he was resting under a tree when he suddenly saw two snakes fighting. And one of them bit the other, and it lay still. Then he saw the victorious snake looking round. He went and plucked a leaf and came in his mouth and stuck it into the mouth of the snake that was lying still. And immediately that snake was revived. So this hunter killed the snakes, and he looked at the leaf, and he immediately could identify it and made some medicine out of it, you know. And to this day, you can be bitten by 10 cobras. All you do is you lick a little bit of it, and you have the antidote to the poison. And so a lot of hunters, whenever they go to the forest, they always have this. If they accidentally step on a snake, they immediately lick it, and that neutralizes the poison. Now, these are people who were educated, and education simply means the ability to cope with your environment. So they knew the environment. I'll show you this, this plant here. We call this abrototo. Let me get a, yeah. You see, we call this abrototo. And we always grow this in the fence around the house. If you have a cat, if you are a cat, say in the kitchen, you just walk to the fence and pluck the abrototo and let the juice fall on the wound, and it immediately stops bleeding. Immediately. This is it, abrototo. That's how we call it. In fact, that's why I put it in this fence, because I'm trying to do what our ancestors did. When they built fences around their houses, they would go and cut trees that are medicinal and put them right in the house, you see, so that if there's an accident or something, there's always a particular tree. I have it down here, not in the fence. Now, this is always in the fence in the house. And when you see a pregnant goat or sheep, you see, chewing the bark of this tree, you know it's about to deliver, because there is something in the bark of that tree which prevents excessive bleeding after delivery. And then when the placenta is delayed, they will pound this medicine, the bark of the tree, give some to the woman to drink, and insert the other, and within half an hour, the placenta will come out by itself. And this was right in the home. Of course, they have lived here for millions of years, so at least one would expect that they would know a little bit about the environment. They knew a lot. But when the Europeans came, they felt, oh, these people didn't know anything.
You were talking about honey.
Yeah. We use, you know, our medicine men have a lot of knowledge. Now, for years they've been using honey for treating ulcers and wounds, deep cuts. And there was a doctor in Nigeria who decided to just pursue this and find out what is in this honey. And he subjected the honey to scientific investigation and found that honey is hygroscopic. In other words, it absorbs moisture. And so by applying honey on an open wound, the honey absorbs the moisture and deprives the bacteria of food, and they just die. And the wound, the skin recovers. And when he published this article, you know, he was hailed as the great man who discovered it, but he didn't discover it. It was the so-called witch doctors who made the discovery millions and millions of years ago. And 2 years ago, there was a Chinese doctor who came out with an ointment, an ointment for burns. And they showed pictures of the burned skin and the skin that had been restored, and you couldn't see any scar. And he wouldn't disclose the contents. Only one thing he would mention, and he said it contained honey. And you see, Africa, China, we know this already. And there are some trees, one tree, for instance, that we use as a chewing stick for cleaning the teeth. It does not only prevent tooth decay and keep the mouth fresh, But there's some alkaloid in that tree that reverses a sickle cell. You see, now you would ask, well, who taught these people? Well, for years we've had, or for centuries, people in the tropics, Africans, have had this sickle cell disease. And so somebody made that discovery thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, that there was something in this chewing stick which was able to reverse a sickle cell. And when the doctors in Ibadan, in Nigeria, came upon this, and they were taught by a herbalist, I've met that herbalist before, they extracted this alkaloid and gave it to sickle cell patients, and all of them were able to go out of crisis. Now, so when people got up in the morning and were just brushing or cleaning their teeth, they were also at the same time taking care of their sickle cell disease. Isn't this marvelous? It's incredible. It's incredible. And all this knowledge is ours. You see, only we don't know what our forebears did. Now, this tree, for instance, is also, it makes a good chewing stick. And it helps to clean the teeth and keep the mouth fresh. So when you go to the farm, the farmer takes a piece of this and he removes the back, and immediately begins to chew it, and it tastes very good, And it is medicinal too. Takes care of, cleans the system, cleans the liver and so on, You chew it, I'll let you try it later. It's very tasty, you see. Very tasty. And our folks know all these. They know all these things. Been doing a lot of research, and every now and then I tell him, you see, we were not meant to die. We only die out of ignorance. That's all. We only die out of ignorance because, well, we don't know. But all these things here have immediate medicinal value. The papaya, I mean the leaves, great medicine, great. Yeah, you see, these dried leaves, you boil them and you put something in it, some of these shintia, it regulates your blood pressure.
Papaya leaf?
This, I'm telling you. Yeah, you see, here, in our traditions, we have the value that old age must be respected. We respect the old because of the experience they have. In fact, for us, to be old does not mean to become useless. And for that reason, a lot of people look forward to old age with confidence. You see, in your part of the world, a person's value depends on his or her economic productivity. But here, a person's value does not depend on that. The old person is your reference, is your encyclopedia. All the things I know I've got from old people like this. You ask them and they tell you. And for that reason, so valuable are old people that we have a proverb that if you don't have an old person in your home, you must be pitied. Because you have no reference. It's your library, living library. And they will tell you. And so we have great respect for the elderly. We have a proverb which says, everybody has been a child before. But it's not everybody who has been an old person. And with old age comes wisdom, which is important. And everybody has had this experience in their lives. If they compare themselves when they were 16 and when they were 30, naturally they know that they know better at 30 than they knew at 16. And yet when they were 16, they thought the world began and ended with them. But when they got to 30, they looked back and saw how foolish they were, how inexperienced they were. So with age comes experience and wisdom, which we need very much in our world today. And that's the reason why that's why we respect the elderly, you see. Yeah, they're great. All the things I know I got from them. Okay, I want you to smell this, this tree. Smell it and see. What's that? Cinnamon. Cinnamon.
Yes,
That's cinnamon, yeah.
very sweet.
Very sweet.
Yes.
And that's an avocado. And then I have cashew trees here too. This is a cashew tree. You know, all the cashew nuts comes from this. Yeah, they do well here. I planted this less than 3 years ago, and it's already producing a lot of fruit. Yeah, and this is another fruit. Very tasty. It's coming in a few years. When you come, it will be ready. And well, I have some pineapples. You see, you can see the pineapples here. Pineapples all over here. It's been overgrown with weeds, but at least you can see a small one here. You see this small one? Yeah. It's George. Yeah. Yeah, you see, this is a beautiful view of the plain, you know. And imagine living here, how peaceful it is. You know, the air is fresh and clean. It's quiet, peaceful. The birds are free, you know. The wind blows. You have the abundance of nature surrounding you. I mean, what else can you ask for? And all this, yeah. You see? These are some guavas. And in fact, it's ripe. We just wash them for you to eat. And we'll wash them. Now, you see that beautiful view you have here. I mean, this is nature at her best. The combination of the mountains and the forests and the clouds and the breeze, all this is just nature at her best. And all these are gifts from the Creator.
You said this is your holy land?
This is my holy land. This is the holy land of all black people. This is where, how can you call somebody else's land holy and leave yours? Every land is holy, and every people must see that their land is holy, and particularly for us Africans, we have to finally come to the realization that this is our holy land. And so the soil on which I'm treading is holy. Now you notice this. When you step out of the plain in Africa and you tread the ground, you have a feeling that this is the heaviest ground you've stepped upon. You know, and that tells you something. Even the ground speaks to you. I light from the plains in other places, and the ground is light. I feel it. But here, you're walking on solid ground, and home of humankind.
You were saying earlier, in terms of the Holy Land, that the Bible is a recent book. Would you explain that?
Yeah. You know, a lot of black people spend hours and hours trying to find out, you know, black people in the Bible. They will quote, Ethiopia shall rise and raise her hand unto God and say, oh, you see, we are mentioned. Well, I feel that as an African, you see, my identity goes beyond the Bible, because the Bible is a very recent book. We're all here when the Jews came to Egypt as slaves and left before they wrote the book. And how can I wait for them to come and write a book before I see myself or have an identity? My identity goes back into millions and millions of years. That's how I feel. You know, the Bible confirms some of the things, but those truths predate the Bible. You see, people who, I'm not putting down the Bible or anything, I'm only saying that historically speaking, it's a very recent book. I mean, God was in the world before the Bible was written. And some people had knowledge of God. What's that knowledge? You know, we cannot confine, if we say that everything was revealed to the Hebrews, we are saying that God didn't care for the other people who lived in the world. How can we say that about God? We can't. We are making God into a very limited, partial being who only prefers some people to others. No, I lay claim on God as much as anybody else, because our ancestors had a name for God and had God's ways. I mean, who but, let me explain this to you, bring me a knife. Who but Africans would have a name for God that says the plantain leaf, large enough to shelter the entire world? Now, you have these plantains here, you know, and when you go to the farm, this was before umbrellas were invented. When you go to the farm and it rains, so what do? You cut a plantain leaf. You cut a plantain leaf like this. And you hold it above your head, you see, and you don't get wet. And so out of this experience, our ancestors called God the plantain leaf large enough to shelter the entire world. In other words, under this one shelter, this one plantain leaf, all human beings have shelter. It tells you immediately that our ancestors did not have an idea of an exclusive God. They had an idea of an inclusive God. Under this one plantain leaf, all humanity has shelter. What an incredible idea. And this came out of our experiences. So here you have a plantain leaf, and when I tell you that our ancestors said God is a plantain leaf large enough to shelter the entire world, here you go. Now this is a palm tree, and you can see here the palm fruit, you know. You can see the palm fruit. This one is young, and when it's ripe, you see, you cut it, and you use the nuts either for soup, and then the kernels, you use the kernel for making oil. This is a very useful tree for us. You can tap palm wine from it. You use the branches for building purposes. You use the inside of the branch for making baskets because it's very supple. You can bend it, it doesn't break. So you use the inside for making baskets. And you can even use the trunk for building. Use it like timber. And you see, our people used everything in their environment for building, the stones, the soils, everything. And this is a cinnamon tree. You see, and from the back, and you can smell this. Cinnamon, yeah. And you can chew the bark, which is very, very tasty, you know. And we use the leaves even in cooking soup, and it becomes very, very, very fragrant. Now, right behind me here is an incredible medicinal plant. I don't know the botanical name, but we call it huintea. And we put it in a lot of medicines. It's very aromatic, and it flowers, it seasons fruits twice a year. I want to begin by saying that the same questions human beings everywhere have asked. How did the world come into being? How did death become part of our experience? What happens to us when we die? Is there a destiny to this world, to life, and so on? All these questions were asked by our forebears, and the answers that were given came entirely out of our own experiences here. Oh, there is the hawk that I talked about. You see that hawk there? As it flies aloft and says, everything that God created is good. There it goes.
I don't see him yet. I see him, but I don't see him in the camera.
We'll get him. We'll get him.
Okay, now you can talk.
Yeah. You see, so we put it into the mouth of the hawk, that all that God created is good. There goes the hawk. Now, our religion is based on our worldview, how we understand the world to be. We believe in our religion that this world was created by God, and that the world is sustained by God. And for that reason, that we don't have any idea in our religion that the world will come to an end, because God sustains it. And we believe that God is essentially a spirit, not a human being, you know. And that's why there are no temples or shrines or physical representations, because God is a spirit. We have a proverb: if you want to speak to God, speak to the winds. And like the winds, God is everywhere. God is invisible. And our religion also has to do with our sense of morality, you see, because religion teaches us how to live with each other, how to live with our environment. The religion relates to the environment. You find that here in Ghana or in Africa, trees and rivers and lakes and the sea and all these things come into our religiosity, because for us, God does not need a temple. The whole universe is the temple of God. You see, we have a piece on the drum, which we play, the drum language, and the piece says, the path crosses the river, and the river crosses the path. Which is the elder? In other words, which came before which? And the drummer answers, we made the path to meet the river. The river is from long ago. By merely looking at nature, our ancestors were driven to the source, to the architect of nature. The path is like the temple or the cathedral. We built it, we know, but we didn't make the river. So all the things we made, we know. And the things we did not make tell us about who made the river. Now there's a very important tree in the distance, which I want you to see. And we call it Cheng Cheng, and that is the tree from which our ancestors made the bark cloth. They would strip the bark and beat it, and it will stretch. And that's what they used for making cloth. So we call it Cheng Cheng. They use it in making bark cloth. You could see some bark cloth at the museum. So it's a very important tree. I had a big one here, but it was threatening, so we cut it. But this one will remain on the farm for posterity, for people to come and see what our ancestors used to make the clothes they used to make. And then down here I have some oranges. Unfortunately, let's see if we can. Then we have this type of orange is called ponkam. Can you pull it down? No, it won't break. Yeah. And this is called ponkam. And it's a combination of tangerine and orange. And it's very tasty. Very tasty. So you see, we live in a land of abundance. Now in the orange season, I don't buy oranges. I stopped drinking water. Last year, during the season, between August and December, I never drank water. I only drank orange juice at home, 7, 8 glasses a day. The wars. But there are so many places in Africa where there's no starvation. Of course, you see, the media is not interested in a place like this, where there's abundance. Starvation is not the only reality in Africa. There's abundance. Look at this. Bananas, oranges, avocados, coconuts, papaya. The media is not interested in this. They're interested in the problem, to give a picture of Africa as a problem area. All the reading you did, all that you saw, did not prepare you to. You never thought you would find a peaceful. Well, we're in Africa. This is peaceful, but nobody in America would believe there's any place in Africa like this. It's all Somalia, and so. But look, this is a very peaceful place, and some of us are just as surprised, to hear of these conflicts. Well, what's the matter with them? We live in Africa, yeah, but look at us here, Can
we talk a little bit about the Akan culture?
Yeah. Well, you see, Egyptian culture, Egyptian civilization had its origins in the headwaters of the Nile. And for millions and millions of years, humankind began in Africa, and then as they discovered or invented these implements and discovered fire and began to control the environment, they started to move out of Africa and first went to Asia, and then after the ice had melted, they went to Europe. And so it all began here. But one can still see some interesting connections between ancient Egypt and what we have here, because the idea of the monarch and the way our chiefs, particularly in the Akan areas, dress and all the regalia and the pomp and so on, all these things remind you of ancient Egypt. And the connections are, it's not funny. The snake plays a very important role, you know, and you find the snake in Egypt, ancient Egypt, and so many things. And it tells you clearly that Egypt was just the flowering of African civilization. It wasn't anything foreign to Africa. It's the Europeans who just wanted to take Egypt out of Africa. But the Egyptians themselves knew that they came from the headwaters of the Nile. Thank God the Nile doesn't flow from the Mediterranean into Africa, but flows from the Africa into the Mediterranean. They knew this, they acknowledged it or recognized it. It's only these people who write history to please themselves. But history has no favorites. And you see, in spite of the effort made to cover up history, it's still pushing up so many discoveries. You see, we have an important proverb which says, if you dug a hole deep into the bowels of the earth and buried truth there and covered it up, it will come out by itself. You won't have to dig for it. And look at all the information that is coming out from the belly of the earth about ancient Africa. We thought there was nothing there, but it's coming. And we're going to see more and more as the century wears on. That's to drink. And I just leave them here. You know, make it a sanctuary for the animals. It has to be lit on. And after a hard week's work, you know, I walk through this forest and I restore my spirit. I'm in touch with nature, and it takes out all the hardness inside me. You see, people who live in steel houses, concrete and so on, are hard. They reflect the environment. And people who live in such surroundings also reflect the environment. You see that people are quite peaceful here. It's because we live close to nature, and nature softens us. We absorb nature. We absorb the peace and the solicitude that is in nature. And so when I walk through here, I forget about my office and all the pressures at the office, you know. Here, I hear the sounds, I smell nature, I feel nature, I taste nature. I see a stick and you know, I break it and I chew it and I absorb nature in me. The essence of it, the waste will come out. And that's how we live here. And this is something, that's why I'm preserving this forest for humanity. Now we have this special, this is also very medicinal. We call it prekese. And you use it, if you make soup, you put some in, and it flavors the soup. But this is also, this combined with some other plant, is used by our medicine men for high blood pressure. And they call it prekese because it makes noise. You can hear the noise. You hear the sound? Yeah, this is kind of wet, but still.
You were telling me earlier that our ancestors preserved food. How did they preserve it?
Well, you know, for instance, if they wanted to preserve food overnight, you know, they'll put a piece of charcoal in it, in the soup or in the stew, and it would stay exactly the same.
Is this something they just started, or is this...
Oh no, they've known this for millions of years. The question I've always asked is, well, why didn't those people who are supposed not to know anything, why didn't they put a bone or a stone, but charcoal? For millions of years, our ancestors have known that charcoal has some properties. One, charcoal absorbs odors. And then charcoal has a lethal effect on bacteria. And to this day, you know, you go to the hospital when you have food poisoning or something, you know, they give you charcoal to chew. And our ancestors have known this for millions of years. See? So it meant that they knew something. You know, they were adventurous. That's why they made discoveries. Otherwise, they couldn't have lived here if they didn't know anything. If they didn't know what food to eat, if they didn't know they had to exercise their bodies, or if their medicines were not good. The Europeans who claimed to have discovered Africa would only have come to find forests and animals with no human beings.
How did the African treat the European when he came?
Well, you see, the African is a person who is, as a result of his upbringing, even to this day, knows that the other person is a friend and not an enemy. In Europe, every other person is an enemy, you know. And so when they saw the Europeans, they welcomed them with open arms. They were not hostile and showed them hospitality. But the European, with very little culture, misunderstood, misread the signs. They thought, oh, these people are afraid of us. They think we are better than they. They see what they're giving us. But that's hospitality. Hospitality is very much part of our tradition. You see, a person comes to you and you give him a place to stay. You give him food to eat. If he needs to farm, you give him land to farm. He doesn't own it, but he must eat. So he has a piece of land on which to farm. The fruit of the land belongs to him, but the land does not belong to him. Even those of us here don't own the land. We believe the land belongs to our ancestors. And our idea of the family is that the family is made up of the dead, the living, and the yet unborn. So those of us living here are only caretakers. We're supposed to hold it for those who are coming. And our ancestors taught us that there will always be people coming after us. That's why we took thought to the future. So when Mbiti writes his book, African Religions and Philosophy, and says, oh, Africans have no idea of the future is nothing but, it doesn't go beyond 6 months to 2 years, then the Europeans are happy. But if the future is 6 months to 2 years, why would our ancestors tell us not to sell the land? Because people are coming. Were they coming within 6 months to 2 years? No. So that doesn't make sense. That's a complete distortion of the African concept of time. Time is so vast that, you know, we can calculate it. Anybody who can count time, 5 million, 6 million, it's not just, it's being unrealistic. It's just taking a very partial, truncated view of time. Time is just endless. Time has no end. And of course, you see, when you read all these eschatological things in the Bible, and you think, oh, well, the world is drawing to an end and so on. Well, that idea of the future as the culmination of everything is not in tune with nature. That futuristic orientation came out of the experience of the Hebrew people. Abraham was told to leave his land to a land that God would show him. So he was looking forward to seeing that land. It was in the future. They were in Egypt as slaves. They were looking forward to getting out of slavery. They got to the Red Sea. They were waiting to get back across the river, the sea. And they went into exile. They were waiting to get back. So the Jews have been a people who have always been in waiting. And so this built into Judaism a futuristic orientation, which was unique until it was duplicated by Christianity and Islam. But those of us who have been here, we've lived here for millions of years, and our concept of time is based on nature. Nature renews itself. And so time is in the form of a circle. It goes and comes. It goes and comes. It never has an end. It's not an expendable commodity that becomes exhausted after a while. No. And so you find that people who have grown out of such an environment with such a concept of time are very stable, they are not anxious. But people who believe time is running out become rapacious, greedy because they know there won't be any more. And this is true to the European character of grabbing and amassing because, well, it's going to be finished. Well, it's not going to be finished. We think we can destroy the world, but nature will never be destroyed. Nature has within itself the processes of renewal. And those who doubt this can look into the temperate climate and see that there's not a year without a winter. And there's not a year without a spring. Nature renews itself. Summer, fall, and the cycle begins again. It's a cycle. It's not a straight line that's going to stop. It's not going to stop.
And these are medicine too.
Roots to make medicine. See? Here.
Who digs all this up?
Oh, people. Because you see here, that's been our nature. You know, you go through there, you need medicine, well, you can come and take it. Because, you know, you need to survive, you need to save somebody, you know. So the idea of private property as such, I mean, if this were Europe, this would be trespassers. You can shoot them. They pluck a leaf from your farm. But we allow them because, you know, they need to survive. They need to take care of somebody who is sick. And this is the only place they can find the medicine. Well, of course, if they take things from here to sell, that's wrong. But if they take to use, then we let them. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's one of the most fantastic trees in the whole world. This is a silk cotton tree, and it must be more than, oh, God knows, 100, 200, 300 years old. See the roots just shooting up. And this provides shelter for animals, you know. The animals can just sleep in the holes here. As you can see here, come and see this one here. It's just fantastic. So maybe an animal has kids, you know, and it can put some leaves here and nurse them right here.
Yes.
You know, and look at the size of that. Fantastic. And take it up all the way up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. The bottom to the top, huh?
Mm.
Yeah, that would be nice.